sleeping, eating, and boredom. The everyday life of a prison inmate usually looks very dreary, but it can be quite different. Today, we show you the most unusual and craziest prisons in the world. You can expect a funny dance prison, a modern 5-star luxury prison, and a prison where the inmates are only outside. It's going to be very interesting, so stay tuned here at Wonderlane. Let's start with the Northern Nevada Correctional Facility, a prison in the USA where inmates are trained to become real cowboys. The prison, which has become known as the Cowboy Prison, is not like the prisons you see in old Western movies, where the inmates sit behind thick bars. Instead, everything here looks like a normal ranch. There are no watchtowers or armed guards, and the inmates don't do any hard labor like stone pelting, but train wild horses like classic cowboys. A training supervisor shows the prisoners what they have to watch out for. This job is not only more interesting for the prisoners than other prison work, but also a real benefit for the state. In Nevada, where the prison is located, there is an overpopulation of wild horses. These are then captured in the steppe and tamed and trained by the prison inmates until they can be sold at auction, for example, to ranch owners. In doing so, the prison can earn about $900 per horse. Now let's move on to a prison that is not at all as relaxed as the Cowboy Prison, namely the Penal de Ciudad Barrios in El Salvador in Central America, which is also known as the Cage Prison. El Salvador is one of the most dangerous countries in the world and has major problems with organized gang crime. Therefore, the state resorts to particularly harsh methods to punish criminals. In the Cage Prison, the exact location of which is kept secret by the government, the name therefore says it all. As in the dark past, the inmates here are simply crammed together with their fellow inmates in cages. The prison is surrounded by a high wall with barbed wire, and in the courtyard there are cages measuring 3.5 meters by 4.5 meters, each holding 30 inmates in sweltering heat. Actually, these cages should only be used for pre-trial detention, and no inmate should have to endure it here for more than 3 days. But in the meantime, many criminals have been housed here for more than a year under inhumane conditions. There is always only the same food, no medical care, and even no beds. Let's now continue with a prison in the Philippines, which runs a very unusual rehabilitation program to bring the inmates back on track. The prison on the island of Cebu houses 1,600 of the country's most dangerous criminals, and in the past, there were violent riots here almost every day, and brawls so fierce that even the guards hardly dared to go out in the yard. To end this, the prison warden had an unusual idea almost 15 years ago. To end the boredom of the inmates and to make sure that they work out, he started having them practice elaborate dance choreographies at least 5 times a week. Since then, not only has the violence decreased, but many inmates have now even become friends and developed a sense of community. The prison warden regularly posts videos of the dances on the internet. Many of these dance videos have now gone viral, and even German TV personality Klaus Hufer Umlauf has already visited the prison as part of the show The Battle Around the World and danced there with the inmates to Michael Jackson's hit song They Don't Care About Us. Let us now turn to a prison which is also referred to as a 5-star luxury prison. The Leoben Justice Center in Austria is regarded as a showcase project in the field of penal services and is therefore controversial among the population. Many citizens are bothered by how good the prisoners have it in the modern prison. Being locked up in Leoben actually doesn't sound too bad. There are fancy, large sports facilities and fitness rooms, a supermarket, and a multimedia library in the modern building. The prison cells here are more reminiscent of a student dormitory than a prison, and can be individually furnished by the inmates. Each individual cell has its own shower, TV, and refrigerator, and many of the inmates live together as in a normal shared apartment, except that they cannot leave it, of course. By the way, no one is forced to work in Leoben, but those who want to earn some extra money for shopping in the supermarket can also have a job in the prison. Now we're going to check out a swimming prison, namely a prison ship. To be precise, the HM Prison We Are. From 1997 to 2006, the English government housed 400 prisoners on this ship, which was moored at the port of Dorset. What sounds crazy and unusual today was once quite common. Already in the 18th century, England used such prison ships to relieve the overcrowded prisons on land. Because this kind of prison was hardly used since the early 20th century, there was a lot of discussion in the 90s before the opening of the prison ship. After a short time, however, the prison ship became a real tourist attraction, and many people came to the harbor to photograph the unusual prison. In addition to the 400 inmates, 250 employees worked on board. But after it turned out that the operation of the floating prison was very expensive, it was finally closed, ending the long history of prison ships in England. Let's continue with a prison against which a ship's prison would be true luxury. It's about the prison in Urga in Mongolia. Fortunately, it is no longer in operation because the accommodation of the prisoners here was so inhumane that it no longer fits into our time. In fact, the name Coffin Prison was used here. The prisoners were handcuffed and locked in a wooden coffin measuring 90 by 120 centimeters, in which they could not even lie down or sit. These coffins were then placed in a dark, cold dungeon surrounded by 5-meter-high sharpened poles. Food was given to the prisoners only through a 15-centimeter hole in the coffin, and every 2 to 3 weeks, the prisoners were then rinsed clean with water. Since 1920, this form of prison housing has been banned in Mongolia. And now, we would like to introduce you to Lincoln Correctional Center, a women's prison in the USA, which caused a scandal as a nudist prison. The guards in this prison are allowed to ask the inmates to strip completely naked at any time so that they can be thoroughly examined for prohibited items. Not only the whole body, but also ears and mouths, as well as all other body orifices are searched, which often serves as a demonstration of power by the guards, and is of course very humiliating for the prisoners. After the guards completely overdid it a few years ago and organized a mass search, the terrible details of which we will spare you here, a court classified some of the practices in the prison as traumatizing. But the normal naked examinations are nevertheless continued here. This is exactly why the Lincoln Correctional Center was given this bizarre title. Last but definitely not least, Gorgona, the last prison island in Italy. Gorgona is a small Mediterranean island of only 2.23 square kilometers, which has served as a prison since 1869. The approximately 70 prisoners here are not locked up in a classic prison, but can move around almost freely and work in agricultural jobs. For example, they take care of livestock, plant and harvest vegetables, or produce honey and cheese. There is even a vineyard on Gorgona, which has become an important economic factor. The high-quality wine produced by the prisoners is very popular and costs about 65 euros per bottle. For some years now, tourists have even been allowed to visit the island after prior registration, and they are allowed to take excursions along routes selected by the prison administration. The free life and work in agriculture is supposed to re-socialize the prisoners there and prepare them for their release. In order to avoid problems, not every prisoner may be housed here. Therefore, only long-term prisoners who have never attracted attention during their time in a prison on the mainland are allowed on Gorgona. And that's it for the most unusual prisons in the world. Write us in the comments which of the prisons surprised you the most. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. We'll see you next time here at Wonderlane.